Hello everyone, welcome to the first lecture session for the course Water and Wastewater Treatment. It's a UG course and I'm Bhanu Prakash from the Department of Civil Engineering at IIT Roorkee. So let's get this started without much delay. First aspect I guess is I want to thank Dr. Bill Batchelor of Texas A&M from whom I learned many aspects including this particular course too. Right, first I would like to do that and I would like to move on to the relevant aspects. But first, why? Why are we discussing this course or what's the relevance? Water and wastewater treatment. Obviously, one answer is that it's typically mentioned as core course for UG civil engineering students and thus you need to take that. But other than that, again, why is it listed as a core course and why this hullabaloo, I guess, right? So let's look at some data here to understand why it is that we need to pay attention or understand the aspects that we are going to discuss in this course. So in this slide I have top 10 causes of deaths. Again here this is for all ages and this data was collected between 2010 and 2013 and obviously goes without saying that here I am talking about India, let's say, right. And typically I provide the relevant link or the source from which I gathered the data at the end of the slide, right, or the lower portion of this slide, pardon me. But if I do not and you still require the data, you can always email me, right. So one aspect here I guess is my email Bhanu Prakash V @CE for civil engineering .iitr for IIT Roorkee.ac.in. Obviously, you are going to have the TAs who are going to assist you and answer your queries in the discussion groups, but whenever you want to draw something to my attention, let's say, or need a response pronto, you can email me, right. So one other aspect is that this is a 30-hour course. I believe that's going to be relevant for 4 credits if I am not wrong, at least that's the system in IIT Roorkee. So you should check what it is or what the credit equivalent credits are for your particular curriculum, let's say, right. And again, as I mentioned, this is an UG course, right. You will have TAs who will assist you and will have homeworks. And one other aspect that I wanted to mention here is that you have to register via the NPTEL portal. And if you want to take the exam, obviously register for the exam too. Why I mention is some students here they enrolled or took permission from IIT Roorkee website to enroll in the NPTEL course without actually enrolling there via the NPTEL website, and they were caught between IIT Roorkee and NPTEL once the deadline passed. So enough of that. So let's move on here. We are talking about top 10 causes of deaths all ages. So obviously India sedentary lifestyles, high carbohydrate and fat rich diet. So cardiovascular diseases prime cause 23%, obviously relatively more in males I guess, right. And then ill defined symptoms, respiratory diseases, yes, related to air pollution, typically this aspect too is also related to pollution. Increasing numbers of malignant tumors and such. But one aspect I guess that I want to mention, at least that is relevant to this course right away, is the diarrheal diseases. We see that even when we consider all age groups, not just the relatively more susceptible age people or the part of the population, we see that diarrheal diseases are leading to the death of 5% of our population, right. And then obviously you have other aspects, but let us say if we look at the relatively more susceptible fraction or parts of the population, what do we have here? Again, the data that we have is top 10 causes of death, but from for the ages 1 to 4, let us see. And here you see that diarrheal diseases contribute to almost 18% deaths, let us say, right, 18% deaths. And then again you have other diseases too, but again we are going to look at diarrheal diseases in greater detail. We will see why, I guess. And one aspect to note is that the top 10 causes cover 91% deaths under this age group, right. As you see, all other remaining causes it is just almost 9% or such. So top 10 causes itself lead to 90% deaths, and that is something to note. And we also see that top 3 causes, meaning pneumonia, diarrheal injuries, diarrheal diseases, pardon me, and injuries are responsible for more than 50% deaths. And the reason that I guess I keep reiterating this particular aspect about diarrheal diseases is that they are typically waterborne diseases, let's say, and it's easy to tackle and save the lives of lakhs and lakhs of children every year. Again, we will come back to that, but one aspect as you see is infants who are relatively more susceptible, let us say, are what do we say, dying in great numbers, certainly due to diarrheal diseases. But let us say once the relevant, once the body has developed, let us say, and has gotten used to the surroundings or the environment, let us see where we are with respect to diarrheal disease. We still see that diarrheal disease occupies a place of infamy here, a high place of infamy, and it is still around 12%. Earlier I guess it was around 18%, and now it is around 12%. So, even in children, let us say, not just in infants, we see that it is what is it now, the diarrheal diseases 12% I guess, right. So, that is considerably high. Again, let us look at some other data before we move on. So, 3 infants die every 2 minutes in India. Again, this is with respect to India. Why is that? Lack of access to clean water, I should have mentioned clean water, sanitation, right, and nutrition and other aspects, but that is outside the scope of our course. So, we are not going to go into that. And how many, let us say, 8 lakh infant deaths were reported in India. Keep in mind that they were reported. And again, we are still a developing country, in even our what do we say, government machinery is yet to capture all the relevant aspects, let us say, or cover all areas. So, I would think that we might probably be under-reporting these deaths, but to what extent, I guess that is up in the air. The lowest in 5 years. So, the one good aspect is that is decreasing, but the infant death numbers are still the highest in the world. Again, this is with respect to this particular report now, right. So, that is something for you to look at. So, just to look at where we or whom we can compare ourselves with, note that this is the highest in the world, but again this is not normalized, as in this is not per 1 lakh population or such, this is for the total population, I guess. So, again we are accompanied by, let us say, Nigeria 4,66,000, and then Pakistan and Congo, right. Obviously, these are not normalized values. So, obviously, the numbers might, these numbers at least I guess should not be used to draw petty or simplistic conclusions. But one aspect to note that is that still we are pretty high, let us say, in this particular category. And one other aspect is that Nigeria and certainly Pakistan and Congo, they are ravaged by war or internecine conflict within the country, obviously, right, and that is why the numbers are high. But in our case, as you saw, we have pneumonia and what else please, diarrheal diseases contributing to a majority of the deaths. And with respect to India, we see that it continues to show impressive decline in child deaths, and we see that its share of global under 5 deaths for the first time is equaling its share of childbirths. Again, that is something to note. We are getting better compared to where we are or were, pardon me, but still we have a long way to go, right. And germ theory, one aspect to know is that what is causing these deaths. Now we know that it is germs, let us say pathogens, right, microorganisms which can get into our body, let us say, and cause trouble to us or make us fall ill, and let us say lead to death or mortality in some cases. But earlier people did not know that. People used to think that it was a bad smell that used to cause deaths, and they used to close their windows and such, and think that that was good enough to keep them safe, let us say, from diseases. And typically germs or pathogens, which again were not known, I guess at that time, it was supposed to be prevalent only among the dirty population. Typically when we say dirty, I guess when we are talking about society based on class and such, again it is based on income levels, right. But again, germ theory, here it is one aspect that, here is one aspect I would like to point out here. Until the mid 1800s, doctors did not bother washing their hands. They would go dissecting a cadaver meaning a dead body, which I guess they used to investigate, because at that time I guess science was not as developed as it is now, and we were still learning about the human body and such. So, doctors would go directly from dissecting or dissecting a cadaver to delivering a child, let us say, right, again without washing their hands. Then a Hungarian medic, Ignaz, I guess, made an essential, much resisted, though we will see why, much resisted breakthrough. What is that about? So, he was working in this Vienna General Hospital. So, he observed that the deaths from the dreaded childbed fever in the doctor led maternity ward were significantly higher than the midwife run clinic in the same hospital. So, in the same hospital you had two clinics, right, and one doctor led and the other midwife led, and the number of deaths in this particular doctor led ward was much higher. So, again please note that germs were yet to be discovered, and as I mentioned earlier, people believed that disease was spread by bad smells in the air which came from corpses, sewage or vegetation, right. So, trainee doctors at Vienna General, what would they typically do? They would, what do we say, dissect corpses in the morgue to find out the reason or cause for disease, and then without washing their hands or such, go to the maternity ward to deliver a baby, right. So, Ignaz, he hypothesized that cadaverous particles, he did not know what yet, something to do with cadavers, let us say, from the morgue were to blame, and that such particles on the hands. So, the carrier was not in the air or such, but something that was being carried by the doctors, supposedly these noble what do we say people, right, say again based on the profession, were themselves the carriers of death, let us say, from one place to the other, at least in this context. So, again where would we, and that such particles on the hands of doctors were making their way into the women's bodies during death, leading to death of the woman, let us say, right. So, he ordered the doctors to wash their hands and instruments in a chlorine solution. Why chlorine? Now, we know that it is a good oxidizing agent, but at that time I guess the reasoning was unclear, but it was a substance he hoped would dispatch the deadly smell of the cadaverous particles. Note that chlorine has a pungent smell. So, after this particular implementation of hand hygiene habits, between the morgue and the delivery room, the rate of mortality for new mothers dropped drastically from 18% to 1%, right. But did people accept him or appreciate his what do we say findings or contributions? Note that again, people are typically not driven by science. We are not in a society, at least not yet, the world over, where people have a scientific temper now, right. Typically emotions, ego and such come into play. So, when Ignaz more or less suggested that doctors, those noble people could, let us say, are acting as carriers of disease, he was ridiculed and such. So, majority of the doctors in this time were from middle or upper class, and they thought of themselves as very clean people. Again different aspects, but I am not going to go into that, compared with the working class poor, right. Doctors were offended that they could cause infections, and he met a tragic end. He as in or Ignaz, Mr. Ignaz or Dr. Ignaz faced great resistance and met a tragic end. He first lost his job and had a mental breakdown, and he died at a relatively younger age of 47 in a psychiatric institution. This always happens in society when you are trying to preach something radically new, let us say either with respect to science, but obviously at that time even Europe or the relatively more developed countries or western countries did not have a scientific temper, but now the situation improved there. But again, here I am talking about acceptance of an idea based on the scientific data or the reasoning out there, let us say, right. So, that is what was lacking at that time, and obviously he was ridiculed. But much later people started accepting or accepted the germ theory. And what is this theory about? It is that certain diseases are caused by the invasion of the body by microorganisms, these which are too small to be seen except through a microscope. And obviously, the people, Louis Pasteur, right, pasteurization of milk and such, you would have heard of this. This person, Joseph Lister, the surgeon, who more or less looked at disinfection, I believe, of the relevant surgical tools and such. They got the credit for this particular theory. But again, this is what we observe again, that is in society, and I wanted to put that out there, right. Again, the source, you can look that up. And one other aspect is how people think and act during pandemics and how prejudices play a role. Even during Corona, we had people from particular community being targeted due to various reasons, and then the poor, let's say, who had no recourse to either good medical facilities or could not, or those who could not fall back on, let's say, bank deposits or such to live, what do we say, a hermit like life. They were thrown out of most people's homes. People, they were not given their monthly wage, and they suffered a lot. But again, these prejudices always come into play during pandemics, let's say, right? Again, that's something to keep in mind. But here I have one particular case, with respect to typhoid, let's say. Until then, the world did not know that healthy people, let's say, could act as carriers. Let's say I am healthy, I have no symptoms, let's say, visible symptoms or such. If not visible, no fever or any such symptoms. But people did not know that, a person like me could be a carrier of a particular pathogen, let's say. So here we have someone here who was vilified as Typhoid Mary, let's say, right? And I guess I have the picture from here and the article from the Hindu out here, let's say, right? So she was a cook, and at that time there was an outbreak of typhoid related fevers and deaths, obviously. And a private detective finally, tried to solve the puzzle, or rather was able to solve this puzzle, and linked her and forcibly made her, or tested her for this particular, pathogen that causes typhoid, let's say. And then, that was the first time people came to know that, healthy people can act as a carrier. But people do not take it that way, right? So they quarantined her thinking that she was an oddball or case. They vilified her as Typhoid Mary, and then they quarantined her for 26 years. I am not going to draw the obvious, comparisons with what's been happening in these couple of months. Please note that I am recording this lecture in 2020, October, let's say, right? And what's been happening with respect to the coronavirus, how people have been prejudiced against their own neighbors, let's say, people working with them or for them, and so on and so forth. So again, more or less the root cause of such issues is that prejudice and lack of scientific temper. But again, what happens, slowly but surely science catches up, right? Again, here I have an aspect, I will come back to this, data. So there was a cholera epidemic in London, right? And it was discovered in 1854 anyway, right? It was spreading through water in London, okay? The outbreak seemed less severe in areas where sand filters were installed, let's say. And the scientist John Snow found that the direct cause of the outbreak was water pump contamination by sewage, not sewage water. So they had what was called as cesspit. Cesspit meaning your septic tanks where sewage is collected and typically undergoes anaerobic degradation. So cesspits were common at that time, obviously, but they were beneath the home and they were taken to the river Thames and such, let's see. So in that particular location though, the sewage, or not the sewage, feces led to contamination of the drinking water. But note that the water does not taste different, does not smell different, and the color too is colorless, let's say. So visually or with the primary senses, people were not able to distinguish it. So what is it that he tried to do looking at this particular data? He tried to disinfect the water with chlorine, let's say. Since the water in the pump tasted and smelled normal, the conclusion was that good taste and smell alone do not guarantee safe drinking water, and this was a deal breaker at that time. Again, people did not accept the findings of Dr. John Snow at that time. But much later, let's say, people started accepting sand filters and chlorination as a way to treat and disinfect drinking water. Again, keep in mind that this was in 1854, germ theory too came about later and such, let's say, right. So for example, here I have a graphic from Wikipedia, the source for which is given out here. So from here you have the number of deaths with cholera as a cause. This is London outbreak, the one in 1854 that we are just talking about. So you see that it's relatively more concentrated in this particular area, I guess. Okay, in this area. And so again, as I mentioned, the person, he piled up the statistics or the data, and what did he observe? He observed that this particular pump was a cause, and also he observed that among the two water distribution or supply companies, let's say, those people who were taking water from a particular company were, falling ill more often, that too with respect to cholera, let's see. Why is that? So, this particular company number 1, let's say, I don't remember the name, was taking water from that part of Thames river into which people used to dump their sewage, let's say, right. So, people did not want to have the sewage piling up near their homes, so they used to dump it into the river, and at that time obviously the thought process was that it was through the, diseases spread through the air, let's say, right. And people did not understand that clear water which tastes and smells fine can also or acts as a carrier of these pathogens. So, the company that was supplying this water, the company or the people who were being supplied by the water from this company fell ill more often, and the other company which was taking water from upstream, let us say upstream of the point of pollution or from a relatively clearer or unpolluted source, those people did not experience as many casualties or cases of cholera here, right. So, again this is one of the original data, I guess, I think this is from Wikipedia. So, again he stacked up such data in stacks. Original map by John Snow showing the clusters of cholera cases indicated by the stacked rectangles. So, here is the pump, I guess here is the pump, and you see that there is greater incidence of cholera in that particular region. So, what did he do? He took out that particular handle out there, right. So, that is something to keep in mind. Cholera, again, what does that look like? It looks like comma shaped, I guess it is comma shaped bacteria, let us say, right. Vibrio cholerae infection, right. This is what we have now. And slowly but surely though people started understanding, but slowly again, why is it? Because people are not typically very much ready to accept data that flies in the face of their assumptions or wisdom passed down generations. People typically think that whatever was told in the past is the God given truth without typically applying logic or reasoning, let us say, right. Again, enough of that, let us move on here. So, here one aspect to note is that we looked at sand filtration, and I do not present the data here. Typically sand filtration alone brought down the number of cases of cholera by 50%. So, let us look at what we have here. I have different process based on separation. Separation process meaning, let us say at least in my childhood we used to have a cloth, and we used to have bin or such, right. And the cloth obviously used to act as a filter. What are we trying to do? We are trying to remove those particles that are bigger in size than the pore size of this particular cloth, let us say, right, or the filter size, let us say, of that particular cloth. So, here we have different separation process based on relatively similar principle other than with respect to reverse osmosis. We have conventional filtration, meaning with respect to activated carbon, sand or such. Micro, ultra and nano, these came much later, but let us concern ourselves with conventional filtration. And here we have the relative sizes of different salts or viruses or pathogens of concern, and obviously molecular weight is given. So, obviously as the size decreases, molecular weight approximate obviously decreases, right, and the size particle range also decreases. Here we have the size in microns, let us say, right. And what do we see out here? Sand particles can be removed obviously by sand filtration, and we see that a considerable fraction of bacteria, let us say, can be removed by sand filtration, and that is what we see out here. So, the simple act of filtration will be able to remove a considerable fraction of bacteria, but not viruses. Obviously, that is something to keep in mind. Viruses just RNA, right. So, that is one aspect to keep in mind. So, let us see what we have out here. We have typhoid fever cases per 1 lakh population from 1890 to 1935 in Philadelphia. Okay. And the case of, who was this? Poor lady, Mary Mollins, typhoid Mary, I guess, right. This was case in, I believe, New York or such. She was the poor lady who was quarantined for 26 years. Later on again, healthy carriers also were identified, but again she bore the brunt of people's pent up anger, if I may say so. So, what do we have here? Typhoid fever cases per 1 lakh population from 1890 to 1935, let us see, right. So, what do we have here? Number of typhoid cases, they started going up, relatively more densely packed societies or higher population densities. So, greater sewage, let us say, in that particular area. sewage leading to what do we say transmission of disease into what do we say the human beings via water. So, that is what we see increasing cases. But then people figured out that filters can be used, and obviously you see a drastic decrease. And then chlorination was discovered as a very effective way to disinfect and obviously what do we say treat the water for pathogens, and then remarkably less, I guess. And at this point, I guess carriers were discovered, and this is why I guess it is written what do we say into various journals and such that the greatest medical revolution of this previous century was not by doctors, but by engineers, I guess. So, that is the reason why I guess we are going to look at this course in greater detail, right. As in India, we see that the cases due to what we say diarrheal deaths and such, or the death due to diarrhea and such are still remarkably high. And we saw the case of what do we say the relatively more developed countries, as in they went through the same phase, but that was relatively earlier. But now we have different challenges, let us say, right, infrastructure is an issue. But again, with respect to dissemination of knowledge, this is what we are trying to do now. So, with such dissemination of knowledge, the hope is that we are going to be able to have a better what we say quality of life for our citizens and humanity in general, right. So, let us see what else I have here. So, I have life expectancy in the US, but I am almost out of time. So, I will continue this in the next session, and I thank you for your patience.